participate. Again, thanks everyone for joining. We're really delighted you can spend some time with us today for our town hall. I am Steve Dandino. If we've not had the pleasure of meeting, I serve as Executive Director of the Association for Undergraduate Education at Research Universities, which we abbreviate as URU. And I'm also Associate Provost at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, which has been the host of URU since 2013. We'll get started momentarily. I just want to give folks a chance to join. They're probably like Dr. Newman going from one meeting to the next, and we're really grateful for everyone working this into the schedules, particularly our distinguished guest. Let me share that, after our honored guest's remarks, well, we anticipate having some time for Q&A. I will moderate. I ask that you add your institutional affiliation, if you would, with your name, and use the raise hand function. That will help us see who would like to pose a question. Feel free to use the chat for chat, and some of my URU Home Office colleagues will monitor that, just in case there's something we need to be aware of. And while I'm giving everyone a chance to join, let me remind you that the University of California at San Diego is hosting our very next URU UVP meeting, UVP meaning Undergraduate Vice Provost and President meeting for those who work at research universities this October 22nd and through 24, and then our January 22 through 23 national conference in conjunction with AACNU in Washington is open to all, and we'd be delighted if folks could join us in DC in January. Come help us celebrate our 25th anniversary as an organization. Let me also just welcome and acknowledge members of the Boyer 2030 Commission. My screen, I don't get to see everyone, so I'm anticipating a few members of the commission to join us, as well as, of course, our UVP members and other URU members and our guests. We're grateful again for your time here. Let me go ahead, since I think we have a pretty good audience, over, looks like 61. We're anticipating maybe a few more. Let me go ahead and introduce our guests. Colleagues, Katherine S. Newman is, as you know, has served as Provost and Executive Vice President of Academic Affairs at the University of California System since January of 2023. She was simultaneously appointed as the Chancellor's Distinguished Professor of Sociology and Public Policy at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Newman previously served as the University of Massachusetts System Chancellor for Academic Programs, the Senior Vice President for Economic Development, and the Torrey Little Professor of Sociology at UMass Amherst, and prior to that, as the James B. Capp Dean of Arts and Sciences at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Newman is the author of 15 books, including her 2023 volume with Dr. Elizabeth Jacobs, entitled Moving the Needle, What Tight Labor Markets Do for the Poor, University of California Press volume. I encourage everyone to reference Dr. Newman's full curriculum vitae. But at this point, well, if you have time, and so you better block out some time for that. But Dr. Newman, thank you so much for the benefit of your expertise and experience for taking time today. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And for what you might have done for my book sales just now, I'm very, very grateful. Those of us who write books that are intended for a specialized audience always appreciate a little bit of the boost that can come from these gatherings. But thank you, colleagues, for this opportunity to speak with all of you. I can see that you represent an enormous range of universities, and I'm sure we bear a lot in common with you. And so I'm hoping that some of my comments will resonate with the issues that you're dealing with. And of course, I see a couple of my own colleagues here from some of our UC campuses, so they can amplify on anything that I have to say from the system office point of view. I thought I would just start with some of the challenges that we're facing as a system that I do think we have in common with other groups around the country, and that do have an impact at the end of the day on undergraduate education, but may not begin by centering undergraduates as their locus in the beginning. I guess the first thing I would say is that most public universities are now facing some degree of financial stress. The funding that was generously provided by the federal government in response to COVID has run out. States are experiencing various degrees of economic difficulty. Certainly in California, when I came here, there was a huge budget surplus and it sort of disappeared overnight, so that we're now looking at the opposite, a budget deficit. And there are many reasons why that might be the case in California and not necessarily everywhere else. But I think the evaporation of federal funds has been a problem for all of us. We didn't all necessarily save for the coming rainy day, and we're now facing that rainy day, and it's highly problematic. In some states and in some institutions, fortunately not for the University of California, but I think for many of you, and I certainly saw this in Massachusetts, the demographic cliff has exacerbated the financial situation because we've got much smaller cohorts of students coming our way. And that generally tends to advantage the institutions that are at the top of the prestige heap, so to speak. And so the UC system is very fortunate. It's a highly selective institution. We have far more students looking for a place with us than we can accommodate, which is to our great benefit. But in many other states, the opposite is the case. The baby dearth from 20 years ago is now coming home to roost. And as I said, I certainly saw that in Massachusetts, because the Northeast is the epicenter of this demographic decline. And California has not been in quite that situation, but it will be. And so I know that the combination of states' fluctuating economic circumstances and this demographic implosion is creating significant challenges for many institutions. And so that creates financial stresses for us, which in California and increasingly elsewhere has been compounded by a surging interest in unionization. We're all familiar, I'm sure you're all familiar with the historic strike of graduate students and postdocs and graduate research assistants in the UC system. I think everyone, well, shouldn't really speak for everyone, but many people in the UC system recognize that our students were battling incredibly high cost of living in coastal California. We're very fortunate that our campuses are located in beautiful places that everybody wants to live, and that means that the cost of rent is exceptionally high. But the same thing's true in Boston, it's true in New York, it's true in many of the cities and regions that you're in. And so I think everybody recognized that our students were really stressed, especially by rent increases that occurred during COVID. Nonetheless, very few state legislators were going to provide a bolus of extra funding to support the consequences of those union settlements. And so that's been an additional financial stress that we've had to try to find our way through. And it has very profound implications, I think, for undergraduate education, because what we're seeing is that our campuses are straining and, in some instances, responding by bringing in smaller cohorts of graduate students because they don't have the money to pay these salaries and at the same numbers that we had before. That's not true in every field. It's not true on every campus. But I do think this is an issue that many of us are facing, and that has direct implications for how we support undergraduate education. It is causing all of us to have to think about the model we have traditionally used for the last 50 years at least, and think about what new configurations might look like. So there's a whole bucket of financial circumstances that are affecting all of us and that ultimately affect undergraduates. That comes at the same time that we're all trying to adjust to the impact of COVID over a long range period on the kind of skills and appetites and capacities that students arrive at the university with. I've heard from many colleagues all over the country about learning loss, about the impact of COVID on students, especially the inequality amplifying impacts. But when those students arrive on our campuses, we have to figure out how to make sure that they prosper, that they are able to take up the challenging academic fields that we are offering to them. And that is becoming evidently difficult. It has become difficult, and we can't expect that to go away anytime soon because the impact of COVID was across the age range all the way down to preschool. So there's a lot to be done to figure out how to help our students recalibrate in the post-COVID period. Two other things that I think are very generally important for us to think about, that I'm sure you're thinking about too, and that is the campus climate questions. Our system has been immersed in this in part because the state legislature has been very concerned about the events of last spring, the difficulties of managing the dual responsibilities of freedom of expression and freedom from harassment, the Title VI versus freedom of expression conundrum, which hasn't really been sorted out very well by the courts just yet. So our system is trying to find its way through these strains that are highly polarizing. And we find, unlike, this is not a new observation, of course, but unlike the Vietnam period when we sort of understood where the activists were and where the institutions they were criticizing were, here we have real conflicts, often internal to the faculty, internal to the student body, as well as between them and outside organizations. A lot of stress around this and a lot of interested parties external to the university, and we are all trying to navigate what that means. In our system, most recently, President Drake sent out a series of expectations to the campuses about what kind of behavior can be tolerated and where the lines will be drawn, in part because the legislature required that of us. And I'm sure that there's more to come on this. So every campus all over the country, and especially with respect to its undergraduate population, is trying to think through how to balance these needs, and it is not easy, and I predict it's not going to be any simpler in the fall. Related to all of that, of course, is the leadership and autonomy of academic institutions, which I think is under a lot of strain right now. We've already seen a number of leaders forced out, and others subject to votes of no confidence. Just an incredibly stressful period of time for academic leadership. And I don't think that's going to go away either. So while that's not specifically an undergraduate education problem, undergraduate education is subject to everything that we face in the institution. And that one is a worry to me because we have historically benefited from a degree of intellectual autonomy that seems to be fast disappearing in some corners of the country and is contested in others. So these are issues that we are all worried about. Let me then talk a little bit about, unless you want me to stop, Steve, and take commentary on these parts.
No, I think go ahead and finish, please. That sounds good.
Okay. So then I want to take some time to reflect on one of the reports that I was provided from your organization and some of the conclusions it's reached, and so just some reflections I wanted to offer on it. I found it incredibly thoughtful. I guess this is the 2030 report. I'm not sure. I think that was the 2030 report that Steve referenced. So here, I just had a number of thoughts about some of the conclusions you've reached and maybe some provocative reactions that I hope you'll contest if I got it wrong. So one of the themes in the report is the great value of general education to our students, and especially the humanities, which have been much embattled in recent years. We know that enrollments have been plummeting in the humanities, or at least enrollments in humanities majors have been plummeting. The humanities is still very vibrant as a set of general education requirements, but I think there's a lot of anxiety among our humanists. And I say this as someone who was an undergraduate major in philosophy. I've never regretted that major. I feel that it was incredibly important in informing me and shaping my mind and the way in which I think about problems. So I am a complete fan of humanistic education, but I look at the data like you do, and I can see sharply declining interest in the humanities. And my colleague, Andy Del Banco, my former colleague at Columbia, Andy Del Banco, I can see his handprints all over that report because he and I have spent many hours talking about these issues. So I'm going to just suggest one solution that I worked on when I was provost on the Amherst campus and that I continue to advocate for, just in case it's of interest to you. Recognizing that our students are thinking a lot more than they maybe did in my generation about their future in the labor market, we developed a series of 3+2 programs that allowed students to major in whatever they loved, whatever they were interested in, and then pivot in their junior and senior years, and often 1 year thereafter, to fields that they might feel have greater promise as preparation for the labor market. And when I embarked on these programs, I actually thought of it as a humanities rescue package. It was a way of enabling students to pursue things they felt compelled by, that they loved, the way I loved my philosophy major, but recognizing that their future might lie elsewhere, to pivot as they got closer to finishing their undergraduate education. And at least our experience on the Amherst campus is that those programs filled almost immediately, like overnight, they were in the black. And that's because they didn't have prerequisites that made it difficult for students to move into them. And it spoke to their ambitions to pivot toward more job-oriented forms of study. So for example, we had a program in business analytics that had no prerequisites. And so students could have majored in philosophy or linguistics or whatever they were interested in, and then make that move. And between their senior year and the first year thereafter, could complete a master's degree that was almost instantly recognized in the labor market. I do feel that like that's a good potential solution, because it allows students to study whatever their hearts desire. And then when they start getting anxious, or their parents get anxious about what's going to happen to them when they finish and discover they can't be professional philosophers, there are other opportunities for them. But I really want to just raise the point that it's probably not adequate to just bemoan the fact that there's insufficient interest in the humanities. I think we need to be more pragmatic about it and think about how we can address both those burning intellectual questions and what I think are very legitimate concerns about students' future in the labor market. A related issue here, and this one probably very few people will be excited to hear me talk about it, but I'm going to anyway. Every survey we have, every national survey we have of students and parents points to their concerns about their occupational futures. I don't think we can wish that away, even as many academics sort of bridle at the idea that college is going to become some kind of training school or skill factory. And we all believe that the intrinsic value of higher education should be preserved and promoted. And I agree with that as well. But I don't think we can fight this trend by ignoring it. And so the question in my mind is, what should we be doing? And I think of this especially in public institutions, because many private institutions have already recognized they needed to go somewhere with this. What are the different ways in which we can accommodate pursuit of vocational preparation while still preserving higher education in its own right? I'm not the first person to suggest that Northeastern University landed on a model long before the rest of us even thought about it. They've been at it for 30 years or so, to enormous success. I'm talking here about their co-op program and variations on the co-op program that we all talk about as experiential learning and so on. I do think that is a challenge we need to take up and we need to address, and we need to figure out how to programmatically make all of these options available to our students. This means reaching out to employers. It means understanding how the programs we offer meet or don't meet the kind of expectations they have for entry-level employees. We learned a lot when I was working as interim chancellor of UMass Boston about how Boston business leaders thought about the curriculum we were providing. And it was helpful to us to understand how they looked at our way, for example, of preparing students in data science or in finance. We learned that there were certain kinds of skills they were looking for that we weren't providing, that weren't hard for us to add on to what our faculty already felt was very important for students to learn in those fields. But however you come at it, I think we do have an obligation to weave together, or at least make available to students, forms of experiential learning on the shop floor where they can develop references, experience that will help them when they try to launch a career. I was talking about a month ago with two people that I met, children of one of our deans, who got PhDs in biochemistry, and then decided they didn't see a future for themselves in academia. They were looking for a future in industry. And they discovered to their dismay that what they thought were the kinds of skills industry would be looking for actually weren't recognized at all by industry. They needed a different kind of experience to translate what they had been doing in the laboratories for their PhDs into what employers understood and were looking for. It wasn't that it was a total 180. It was almost like a slightly different dialect, but the lack of that dialect was impeding their job search. I think both at the graduate and undergraduate level, we have some obligation to provide experience for our students in collaboration with local employers so they don't face that kind of gap and are, in a sense, ready from day one, if that's the future that they so desire. And I think we've got a long, long way to go with that. And the numbers of students that we serve in large public institutions makes that even more difficult. In the private universities where I've worked, it's a little more manageable because the numbers of students involved is smaller, but I still think we have an obligation to think about it and to provide for it. So these are, but I want to emphasize that in thinking about providing for those, what we might call them vocational experiences, if you will, we should continue to recognize that one of the most valuable aspects of human capital that we provide is the capacity to learn. The students are going to take up jobs that will not be the last job they ever take. They will probably have 10 or 12 jobs in the course of their career, and the ability to learn new things and to be an adept learner is a really important part of what I think a liberal arts education provides, but it's not enough for us to just say that. We have to show that that actually is an adaptive capacity that's going to make a difference for the employers that they're seeking to join. So these are some of the things that I've been thinking about as I looked at your report and as I reflected on our what is happening in our system recently. And I think I will just sort of stop there and ask for your comments.
Thanks so much, Dr. Newman. This was terrific. People, please use your raise hand function. That's what I want to say. And that way we'll see who would like to pose a question. We've talked economics, politics, the Boyer 2030 report. What more?
I see Mary Wright's hand.
Oh, well, I don't. Wonderful, Mary. Thank you for joining. Dr. Wright is a member of the Boyer 2030 Commission, as well as she can introduce herself from Brown University. Thanks, Mary.
And I am also a sociologist. So having taught your work in courses, I know that you are not a sociologist of higher education, but you do study many of the constituencies that perhaps higher education doesn't serve so well, the working class, for example. And so you mentioned your remarks as provocative. I agree completely about them. I think other areas of the world do a much better job about thinking about work integrated learning, as they call it. We use world readiness, or Kathy Davidson's term, but I think we could do a much better job at that. I'm curious though, thinking about your own research, though, and your study of perhaps constituencies that higher ed is not serving so well. What can we learn to do a better job at access and inclusion? So the Boyer report really had a focus on the simultaneous aims of access and excellence and not seeing those as orthogonal. So I'm curious, from your research background, what should we have included, or what can we learn moving forward?
Well, if I may be parochial, and I never feel parochial because I'm such a newcomer to the UC system. But when I look at the University of California, I see an institution that has managed to balance excellence and access in ways that I just have never seen anywhere else. Something like, and I'm sure Scott and others who are on from UC will agree with me here. Something like 40% of our undergraduate students are the first in their families to attend college. More than that are Pell students. In an institution as selective and excellent as this, to have that kind of access pattern is quite extraordinary. It's one of the reasons why I decided to come back to the UC system after 40 years on the East Coast, because it is such a remarkable track record. And I do think it's worth looking at how did the UC system achieve those kinds of outcomes. Part of the answer lies in our very close association with the K through 12 system in California. Right? We have very tight relationships with, and we have all kinds of organizational structures that enable the university faculty to be in close contact with the K through 12 system to set standards, to articulate what those standards mean and why they're important. So I think that kind of, I mean, it's much tighter than I saw in Massachusetts, for example. So I think that certainly has been helpful. A tremendous amount of outreach. We spend millions of dollars on outreach to the K through 12 system and to diverse audiences. We have special summer programs. I mean, many of these things Brown University does and all the rest of you do as well. And I think the more we invest in it, the better. We have special summer programs. We have one of the areas that I'm particularly keen on, or I was keen on in Massachusetts, and I'm hoping this will become of interest to my colleagues in California, is creating tighter links between our faculty instructors and young students out there in the high school. So for example, in Massachusetts, we created something called the Commonwealth Collegiate Academy. The Commonwealth Collegiate Academy beamed live courses online, basically Zoom-based, but live instructional content to high schools all over Massachusetts, in rural areas, in hard to reach parts of the cities. And so those were our instructors, our courses, provided free of charge, up to a year's worth of college credit to students in Massachusetts coming from schools that were under-resourced and where we were concerned they were going to fall off the pathway to higher education. The state legislature paid for this. The governor had a line item for this program and many others like it, most of which were face-to-face. Ours was done remotely in order to try to capture a much larger audience. I do think there's more of that we could do. And the advantage of it is that it introduces students to real college level material. It's not, it's not like AP courses, which with all due respect to AP instructors, is not college instructors providing that material. So this was our instructors providing it at the same level we provided it to students who came to us face to face. We did enable the students out all over Massachusetts to come to our campuses. We wanted that sense of belonging to increase. And the high school teachers were the support structure, the on-site support structure for the academy. So if it's a math class that's being beamed to a classroom in a rural area of Massachusetts, those high school instructors became the kind of local support structure. And I think that, obviously I'm proud of that because it was a major undertaking, but it's an example of the kind of thing we can do to open up access, because we can't really expect the inequalities in the K through 12 system to right themselves by themselves. They won't. It takes more intervention. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Is there another question? I may not be seeing the hands, so if you have your hand up, maybe just jump in. How about I pose a question, if that'd be all right?
Sure, of course.
You said, Dr. Newman, that you used the word parochial to describe your, thinking about the UC system institutions, but I don't think that's necessary. I think everyone admires it very much, all the institutions in the system. Could you maybe say a little bit more about your vision for where you're seeing any innovation or, exciting developments within your own university system institutions?
Oh man, there's so many, I hardly know where to start. And perhaps some of my UC colleagues can help with this. In fact, Richard on the UC Santa Cruz campus, I don't actually know what your field is, Richard. I apologize. What is your field?
Oh, engineering.
Engineering. Okay, well, that's close enough, because one of the things I was going to say is that the Santa Cruz campus has been particularly effective at addressing the inequalities that emerge in certain basic introductory STEM related fields. So they've been interested in calculus, interested in chemistry. These are gateway courses to STEM majors, almost all STEM majors. And the Santa Cruz faculty have been instrumental in re-examining those courses and looking for best practices that will shore up some of the dropout rates that were of concern. I don't know, Richard, can you pick up where I just left off? Because you know more, I'm sure.
And so of course I'll mention Jody Green and all her work in it. I just say so much of it is about working with the faculty to make sure that the courses are the right courses, are teaching what's needed for specific groups of students. So having, different calculus sequences, different chemistry sequences, different physics sequences for students going on different pathways, and working to redevelop the course, and then work to make sure that you're supporting the students as they're taking part, enrolling, preparing for the courses. But so much of it is about the sort of fundamental curricular design, and where not just of the course, but of where the course sits in the curriculum as well.
Yeah, Scott, I don't know if you want to add anything from the Santa Barbara campus about the things that you're working on there that are addressing course design as ways of enhancing student performance.
Well, I think as everybody knows, and as you mentioned, I was thinking about your comments to how the UCs have managed to maintain both excellence while having access, and so much of that could be attributed, I think, to graduate student education and the graduate students who have taught so many of our lower division classes. And now the challenge is going to be in the next few years with the reality of the new contract, how we maintain that with probably most of our departments having fewer graduate students that they're affording to pay. And so I think that across I know on our campus and across the UCs, those issues are being dealt with, trying to figure out how we might be able to use undergraduates to help with some of that work. So it's going to be an interesting time. I mean, I think another big thing that's crucial to understand about California is it's so easy for us who are here to to forget the miracle that is our intersegmental general education transfer curriculum. The fact that a student at a community college in California can take that course and will know how it will apply to either their major or their general education requirements at a UC or at a CSU is miraculous in many ways. And so it means that for many of our students who couldn't afford to be here for all 4 years, that they're able to do the first couple of years and just keep running when they get here as transfer students. And so, those are two things that have been, I think are at the heart of our success as a UC.
Thank you, Scott. Those are excellent points. I would say, in my experience when I taught at Princeton and at Columbia, both of those institutions were sort of allergic to the idea of transfer students. They didn't really permit it in the years when I was teaching there. And I could see at Princeton in particular that has changed. And so they are in part because they were responding to a mandate for increased diversity and began to recognize the transfer system was an option for them. But that's a big change for Princeton. It certainly didn't operate that way when I was a faculty member there. But you're absolutely right. Part of the University of California's success owes to the original master plan from the 1960s that expected most students would actually start out at the community colleges and then transfer, but that only works if there's a kind of seamless relationship between the faculties at these different institutions who can make sure courses will actually count. And I don't want to suggest that that's always simple. It's not. We've actually just recently gone through a big discussion that I'm sure isn't over about preparation in mathematics. A lot of concern about changing requirements, mostly about whether data science would be allowed as an aspect of mathematics, a highly contentious question. Contention or no, part of the success of the University of California in terms of its diversity is that transfer system, as you pointed out. Something like 1/3 of the graduates of our undergraduate programs every year have their origins in the community colleges. That's quite an extraordinary record. And their time to degree is not noticeably impacted by having that origin either. They graduate basically at about the same pace that our, so to speak, native students in their freshman year do. So all those things are important. But of course, California's demographics, we have a reasonably large Latinx population. 5 or maybe it's almost 6 of our campuses are HSI institutions. That's a pretty powerful record. And we can see the increased rate of college going for students of Hispanic background. And I think we'd find in general, the West is a region that benefits from having a large and growing Latinx population. The Northeast didn't have that, and it's harder for them to attract the number of students they need. Let me just ask, since I've been blithering at you for some time, what have I missed? What are the issues that you're concerned about on your campuses that I didn't mention? I'd be very interested in learning what your worries are, or the issues you're working on.
Looks like we have a response perhaps from Ann Austin at Michigan State University.
Thank you so much, Steve. Dr. Newman, thank you very much for your comments. I'm a visitor to this group, and I feel very honored to hear your thoughts. I did want to ask you, I appreciated your comments about the challenges concerning graduate education and the unionization. I know certainly in your state, but elsewhere also, has been on the minds of institutional leaders as well as the graduate students. And it made me want to ask you about the academic career. I think, at least anecdotally, there's observations that, and there have been, I think, maybe for the last decade or so, that many doctoral students are interested in other careers outside of academia, which of course is entirely appropriate in many fields, but perhaps happening, at least for some individuals, because of some reluctance to consider an academic career. And in thinking about that, I wondered your thoughts about what you would particularly highlight in the academic career to our young colleagues who are graduate students that might encourage them to consider a career within the academy as a faculty member, but also how you see that academic career changing, what some of our challenges may be coming up. I realize that's quite a wide question, but your thoughts on any part of that would be appreciated.
Yes, it's a huge challenge. And, I honestly don't think that there's any reluctance among our graduate students to consider an academic career, but they don't see much opportunity there. They see that opportunity drying up, and they're trying to be realistic about what their opportunities might look like. And of course, this varies by field. In Richard's field, engineering, there are lots of opportunities for people in the private sector. But that wouldn't be true if you're an English major, or not as true if you're an English major. So or graduate student. So I think that there has been a real crisis of academic opportunity for our graduate students. And I don't really see that changing very much, in part because the demographic decline I was talking about before means a shrinkage in the population of undergraduates, first. And second, as you're all aware, we've seen a kind of replacement across the country of tenure track, academically oriented academic jobs with a teaching profession. And that's a very significant proportion of our courses are now taught not by graduate students, but by professionals who are highly successful teachers. That's a big difference from when I was a graduate student. That doesn't mean that wouldn't be an appealing career for many people, but it's not what they were thinking of if the tenure track research career is what they were after. I can remember back when I was a grad student 1,000 years ago that we were being told, well, there's going to be huge waves of retirement and all kinds of opportunities opening up. And yes, those waves of retirement happened, but the opportunities that opened up didn't look like the people who were retiring. And I think that we're probably going to be looking at that for many years to come. But how can we provide people with better opportunities at the graduate level to prepare for whatever future they aspire to and can actually see as practically possible? I do think we're going to have to look again at the structure of graduate education. We are doing that in the University of California. We have been having these, what we call congresses across our system to address those kinds of questions. And I have heard everything from trying to find a way to fund an entire year of sort of co-op-like or internship-like opportunities for graduate students. And in some places, people have been hiring practitioner faculty who have expertise and can help students both with connections and preparation. So for example, in public history, Right? Public history is a field that is of importance. Academic historians may or may not be able to prepare people for those kinds of opportunities, but other people might be able to. So there's some changes in how we are trying to access training opportunities for our students that will be very practically possible for them. In the end, as those two folks in biochemistry taught me, it's not just skills, it's connections, which is true for academic employment too. So we need to think more about how we enable graduate students to make the kinds of links they need in order to foster the careers they're looking at. So I think we can look forward to changes in graduate education that emphasize those aspects as those students get more and more practical about their futures.
Thank you so much for those
Thank
thoughts.
you. Matt.
Yeah, thanks. I'm curious, as we were talking about increasingly or being in an environment with decreasing resources, and that includes funding, that also means faculty and staff, while at the same time having a shifting or changing or evolving student body. How do we support faculty to step up and be successful in this new challenging environment, knowing that we have fewer resources, fewer support staff, and fewer support structures in place to help them succeed?
That is a very good question and not an easy one to answer. But I think the first thing we need to do is recognize that that's real work and not treat it as some sort of sideline that doesn't count, but you know, the next article in the next journal counts, but this doesn't count. The nature of a faculty person's job is very well-rounded in that respect, and we should recognize all of that effort and reward it as best we can. I do think we are going to have to put a lot of thought into how we support our faculty in the undergraduate classroom. If we're not going to have the graduate students that we've had traditionally, then what is the best way to support them? Because if we don't, then they have less time for their research, which is the coin of the realm for them, and that will be a recipe for frustration that I don't think we want to see happen. But there are various models people are bandying about and thinking about. I think it's a little early to forecast which ones of them will be most successful, but we certainly must recognize that if we don't provide that kind of support, we will make it impossible for our faculty to do what we've told them we want them to do, which is to be successful researchers and successful teachers. Hillary.
Thanks, Matt. I think we see Hillary Prochnow from the University of Texas at Austin, and you were a board member.
Hi, Dr. Newman. It is good to see you again.
Indeed,
I had the
Hillary.
pleasure of serving on a panel with you at the CERU convening last
I
summer.
remember.
So I'm really glad that you talked about career. I'm somebody who, 5 or 10 years ago would have, said it's not my job to prepare students for a career, and I feel very differently now for a lot of different reasons. And I'm still struggling with that, but I wonder if you have thoughts to share with us about badging and other sorts of credentialing, and that for me, I feel like it's still the Wild West, and we sort of haven't decided what they mean and whether they're have a purpose in higher education. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are, as it intersects with career concerns.
That is a really good question, Hillary. And I think I have an answer that's not super well informed, but I'll give it to you anyway. We hear a lot from employers about what they're looking for, and even from them about their skepticism about higher education and whether or not it produces anything of value for them. But when you look at their hiring patterns, it doesn't look like that at all. It really doesn't. So there's a sharp distinction between the rhetoric and the practice. The practice is more and more education advantages people in the labor market. The chatter is kind of a negative valence, and I don't give it a lot of credibility as long as I see those hiring patterns at what they are. That said, I do think there is a role for certificates among adults who are already in the labor force and want to either do a career change. So this is really more the province of extension services and sometimes master's degree programs, often self-paying master's degree programs. When people want to make a career switch and they need to they need to make it clear that they have new skills, they turn back to the university to do that. And right now, something like $19 billion a year is spent by American corporations on returning on educational benefits, on basically on education and tuition. That's a big number, and it's there because they actually do continue to see the university as a source of training and human capital. The other thing I will mention, then I'll call on Maria, is that I have been involved in programs that have multiple potential pathways flowing out of them. So I was the founder, along with a couple of other colleagues, of the program on inequality and social policy at Harvard. It's very, very successful. It's like 25th year, and it really has been quite a remarkable run. But when I look at where the students landed when they finished that program, many of them are in the higher reaches of higher education. In fact, some of them are now becoming deans and provosts themselves. But a significant number became researchers in think tanks in Washington, right? They went a completely different policy route, and that program trained them to do both. And I do think it's worthwhile in those domains where where it makes sense to faculty to think about those kind of bifurcated pathways. People in engineering think about it all the time, but I don't know that that's always true on the social science and humanities side of the equation, and it should be. Maria.
Yeah, I was gonna add something because, well, I'm a humanist. And I didn't grow up thinking about what my job was going to be. I just, landed something that I really love to do, and transferable skills that I learned as an undergraduate and in graduate school. But again, I did not know I was learning them because, as you pointed out, the most important part of the capital that I acquired was learning how to learn. And so sort of adding to your very exhaustive answer to Hillary's question, just a footnote. We do a lot of teaching students that they don't necessarily reflect on. Oftentimes, and coming from an Italian background, meaning my undergraduate degree, I encounter students who think that magically 3 credits in a semester system times 5 times 8 semesters equals a degree. No, you need to put in something of your own beyond the learning of the materials. And so surfacing that, which Northeastern does through co-op, is a way that is something that we need to underscore for students, including with badges at the undergraduate level. I'm sorry to say, but you gamify it, and you involve students and student activities and clubs and obviously curricular, some of the high impact practices that AACNU tells us about. And it becomes really, we just started this on the Miami campus, but it becomes a way for lots of faculty to discover that, I don't know, you are in public administration and there are 5 student clubs that do things that are connected with that. And so it becomes a way, obviously, to surface this for students, to tell parents this is the value proposition, but to also reaffirm for ourselves, for our own internal constituencies, what a residential education actually means, right? At a Research One institution specifically, but in general, bringing together students from all sorts of places and socioeconomic backgrounds, we hope. So there are ways to do it, and I'm sure that what works at Miami might not necessarily work on other campuses, but I had, like Hillary, a bit of a conversion myself, because I was like, I'm pure, I'm up here, it doesn't work. And it didn't work for me, right? It was more than the purity in my own experience.
Well, good for you. That's a conversion story that we ought to bottle and sell. I want to mention one other kind of program that I developed, just in case this model is of use to you. When I was working on the Boston campus of the University of Massachusetts, that is a commuter school with a very high minority population, locked at the hip with an incredibly rich city full of major corporations that had never, ever spent any time at UMass Boston. I mean, it's an 8-minute ride on the Red Line, and the vast majority of business leaders had never even been there. At the same time that they were talking about the need for diversity in their firms. Here's this, we had 3,000 students in the School of Math and Science at UMass Boston. And a booming bioscience industry in Boston, and these two things were just not linking at all. So we developed something we called the PACE program, Professional Apprentices and Career Experience. So let me just explain how this worked. On our campus, as is true on all of your campuses, we have all kinds of professionals who could mentor students. We have people in the budget office. We have people who do logistics. We have people who do healthcare. We're little cities. All of us are little cities. And we don't take advantage of the presence of those very devoted professionals. We just think about our faculty as teachers, but actually there are lots of teachers on the campus, or lots of people who can serve as mentors. So for example, in our IT division, we asked our IT people to take under their wing a series of students who were studying IT in the classroom. And we asked them to design basically a kind of a curriculum, if you will, of progressive difficulty. So they had a project portfolio. It had to start off with relatively simple projects, and by the end had to be quite sophisticated. And our staff mentors, if you were serving as instructors to those students. And then at the end of that, the student not only had a portfolio of projects to show for themselves, they had references from professionals in their field. We then linked them to business clusters in the city of Boston, who now were asked not to take on people who were completely green and had no experience, but people who actually had quite a lot of experience. So when you look at your own campus and ask, what are the skills that our employees, whether they're faculty in the labs or staff people in the budget office, what are the skills that they've mastered that they could potentially help to transfer to undergraduates? It has been a very successful program. It was initially philanthropically supported. I think the philanthropists involved have continued to support it, but it has been magical. So, there are major investment companies in Boston, some of the best in the world, who had never, ever hired a single student from UMass Boston. And in the first year of that program, they hired 4. Now, that's not an enormous number, okay, but 4 times picking up a pathway is a pathway nonetheless. When I think, for example, I know my colleagues at Santa Cruz who are doing tremendous work, Mike Beck and others, on sustainability, right? They're doing all these amazing projects that are trying to use sort of, in a sense, natural technologies to contend with things like flood control or soil erosion, right? These are all things that students can learn on campus in a mentorship, professional apprenticeship form, and then transfer to companies who will use those skills as well. So we probably could do more to develop programs like that and not do damage to the intellectual armature that we all value. We're not looking to dismantle it and make it something else. We're looking to make it serve a broader set of purposes. And it won't be of interest to everybody. That's okay. That's the other thing I've learned. You don't have to have 100% of the faculty thrilled about this. You have to have a certain number of people and staff people who are interested as well. And by the way, we found at UMass Boston that this gave staff people who never felt connected to the educational enterprise because they were really in a service capacity, a reason to feel like they were part of an educational institution as opposed to, I don't know, Procter & Gamble. So I just raise these things because as a labor market researcher, I understand what our students were missing. They were missing references. They were missing practical experience. They were missing connections to those firms. And as first generation low income students, their families weren't going to be able to give that to them. That was our job. And I think that's probably true across the country. So I leave you with that. Steve, why don't I turn it back to you for the last 5 minutes?
Yeah, I think, could I ask you one quick last question?
Sure.
Here we are, we're kicking off the academic year, and you brought it up, the issues about politics on campus that will surely affect us. It might even, I think there's concern it might drown out a lot of our other concerns, whether it's international or domestic in sort of origin. Do you have any advice for undergraduate leaders in particular about what they should be trying to do and thinking about based on all your experience as a university leader?
You know, this is going to be a very hard season. I don't think anybody on the West Coast is looking forward to it from that point of view. I guess some of the lessons that we learned, reaching out to activists and making sure there are avenues of communication is important. It doesn't always feel possible, but it is important because when things get really hot, somebody's got to be able to negotiate those relationships. I think we're going to find everybody's going to be a little bit firmer about discipline, and we will see whether or not that works. There's a lot of anxiety about that because we don't like the idea of sanctioning our students. We're not here to be, didn't sign up for a war. We didn't sign up for constant disciplinary orientation, but I think we're going to have to try to be at least even-handed and fair and transparent about what we expect and what we will hold people accountable to. Whether we want to do that or not, the state legislature is going to insist on it, and so we will have to. And I just have my fingers crossed and all the other appendages that we can do that in a way that doesn't destroy the kind of affection and support we try to provide for students. So it's more of a worry than it is an assurance. I do think that where we can provide for truly open forums that are respectful opportunities for dialogue and debate, that is important. We often see people hiving off to their own corners, screaming at each other without any real opportunity for what we might have seen in the past as sort of, reasoned debate. And that's where a lot, I think, of the hottest and most unfortunate stereotyping happens. So where people can develop respectful forums, I think that's valuable, but I know it's not easy, so I don't want to suggest that it's a panacea. I think we're going to need the cooperation. I know on our own campuses, we're trying to figure out how we work with external agencies because we don't maintain a huge standing police force. I wouldn't want to. It would be incredibly costly, and we don't want to be a police state. But we also are not going to be able to let people destroy buildings. And we're not going to be allowed to let people block access. And that sometimes calls for the support of external agencies and making sure that we have appropriate agreements with them and understand our objectives. So I think that's going to be important, but I can tell you that I'm not looking forward to that aspect. And I know my campus colleagues are not either, but it's just something we're going to have to face, and we'll see where we go.
Well, one of the hallmarks of URU is we have candid conversations, and we thank you so much for your taking time out of your busy schedule to offer your candid perspective on all of these very many complicated issues. And we wish you all, your colleagues in the University of California system, all the best this fall and throughout the year. And we look forward to being on campus in San Diego in a few months to learn firsthand from colleagues there.
Great.
So,
well, thank you for having me.
Everyone, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but thank you so much. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.